Hi, everybody. I see we have some people still getting on the line, so I think we'll give our guests a minute or two to get settled in before we kick things off. I see a few more people just came in. Just a heads up for everybody, we're going to give our guests a minute or two to join the line before we kick off the session. Thanks. All right, it looks like we have a good group in the room, so I think it's about time to kick things off. Welcome to today's session. Thank you all for joining us today. If you're not familiar with these sessions, our monthly Torque Talk series was created to provide an easy way for our customers, partners, anyone who's interested in learning more about Quali to join, see what the latest functionality can do in our product. And we typically focus on one specific use case on the session. If you haven't joined us before, I always make sure to remind everyone that this is an interactive session. Our Q&A is open, so please feel free to submit any questions anytime throughout the session. We reserved a few minutes at the end of the session to answer your question. We anticipate wrapping this up in about 30 minutes total. So if you're see that we're running out of time, make sure you get your questions in. For today's session, we're going to show how our users create shareable infrastructure resources that they and their other teammates can use to support separate workloads. And fortunately, today we have our CTO, Eden Eventhal, to present. So I'm going to hand it off to Eden to kick things off.
Thanks a lot, Colin. And pleasure to be here and to run through this exciting webinar about sharing infrastructure. And let's get started. So maybe I think the best way to talk about this is to talk about the challenges with infrastructure and how we would like to share it between consumers in the organization. Then talk about what we think would be a good solution to that around environment publishing. Go through a demo, a short demo of how it actually looks like, and then hand it over to you with questions if there are any. And I'll start with one slide, promise just one, about what we are, and before diving into a specific topic. And this slide is best looked at from left to right. So we're talking about all kinds of IACs, cloud resources, what Torque and Quali, what we know to do is basically curate these IAC assets, these cloud resources, to basically take those and create templates that we call blueprints of environments in order to create a catalog that can then be offered to consumers of infrastructure in the organization. And they, in a self-service manner, can create environments out of those catalog items, live instances that you can get all kinds of services like drift detection, running day-to operations, pushing updates to your infrastructure, and much more. And finally, we store a lot of data around the activity that's done on infrastructure, the cost that is associated, waste detection, and much more. And that is provided in all kinds of reports. And this is an end-to-end. There are a lot of layers of value that Torque provides, but in a nutshell, This is the flow that we're working with and value that we're providing for. And let's go and talk about the topic of this webinar. So, we know that customers have their Terraform files, Ansible files, OpenTofu files, Helm charts, and so on and so on. And Torque provides for quite some time a great solution for scaling those assets in a governed way. And we are asked in different occasions about, okay, so I instantiated my Kubernetes cluster. That's great, but how can I offer that to others in the organization in order to really work on it in a governed, secured way without actually being exposed to that cluster? So how can I actually provide a self-service approach to teams that would like to work with that centralized service? And then once, let's say I do provide that, then how can I understand the visibility and references between these pieces of infrastructure, between these environments? How can I really maintain governance and control over the resources that are used? And what we saw is something fundamental around the separated life cycles of these infrastructure environments. And we have here just a few examples. It's not a complete list, obviously, of Kubernetes clusters, of RDS services, of a Kafka service, and then the appropriate way of perhaps consuming it. I would like to deploy some Helm applications on the cluster. I would like to create a database. I would like to create a queue, and maybe just to, talk about why are these different life cycles? Because the Kubernetes cluster might be offered to several teams, and my Helm charts that I would like to deploy on top of the cluster might be ephemeral, but the cluster might be always on. They have, centers, different business units that would like to work with them inside the organization. The common between the infrastructure, the core infrastructure part, is that they are managed by the DevOps, by the platform teams in the organizations, and they really need a solution to instantiate on one side the centralized infrastructure environment and to be able to offer them to the developer teams, to the data scientists, to those that need to consume the infrastructure. So this is a high-level overview of the challenges that we saw. And what we are offering is a way to basically share the centralized infrastructure. And in the demo that we're going to see shortly, then we're going to show a demo on a Kubernetes cluster, which is a classical example of a core infrastructure team that would like to expose a few clusters to the application teams, and then how they can basically consume them. So we came up with this way of publishing an environment. An environment can be big or large. It can hold as many pieces of infrastructure as you would like. The infrastructure team can basically decide to publish in the environment outputs. The environment itself is sort of a black box in that sense. And then the outputs that were defined by the designers of these environments can be exposed in a much more educated way to those that need to have access to those centralized infrastructure. And then development in other teams can really leverage what was exposed and shared with them in order to create their workloads, obviously in their approach, in their domain, and really in a self-service way. So with that, I hope it gives some sort of overview of the challenge and the way we decided to address it. And with that, let's do a quick demo and show you how this would look like. So this is Torque, a self-service platform for environment as a service that helps you with your infrastructure automation inside the organization. You can see here, and this is an important part in the demo, so I'll maybe just explain that there is this revamp space. A space basically defines a catalog. You can have several catalogs in the organization, and you can also have different users or groups in the organization that have different access to spaces. In this case, the revamp space is the core infrastructure team that is in charge of the Kubernetes clusters in the organization. They also have their own agents where they actually deploy their Kubernetes clusters. So this triangle of agents, users, and catalog are actually what define a space. So basically to this revamp space, only the infrastructure team that is in charge of Kubernetes are allowed to enter and do their activity. Now, we see that there is this EKS cluster that is available for launch. So I'll go ahead and launch one. Usually, I'll probably want this always on. I wouldn't want to share something that would be ephemeral. So I have already few that I created, and they are always on. For the demo purpose, for me not to forget to turn it off, I'll just, keep it for 2 hours. If there was any name required, then that would be, and I'm sure all kinds of inputs in different flavors of Kubernetes clusters, then this is where they would be entered. Tagging is an important part that is integral into the system, the ability to tag everything that we know, plus everything that the customer needs in terms of custom tags to be provided. Basically, I'll review my request and launch the environment. At this point, the Torque actually communicates with my cloud account and starts with the orchestration plan. In this case, it's a simple Terraform that we can see here, the details of it. We can see where it is deployed. Just to show you that this Kubernetes is sort of a Terraform EKS Terraform that is has a lot of static definitions to it, just something that we're using internally. And this is the representation of it. We have all the Terraform logs that can help me keep track in case something goes wrong and I need to debug. I need to get insights from our AI Copilot in order to understand if things go wrong. I see that it's going to take quite some time because it's an EKS cluster. So I'll go to the operation hub where I can see my live environments. This is the one that I just launched. And I see I have here two clusters that are already prepared and launched. They are already published. I'll use this environment, which is a VPC, to talk about the publishing mechanism. So I'll go into the publish settings part, and I can see that I have the option to change and give an environment a unique name. Why is that important? Because when I expose this environment for others in the organization, I would like to give it a meaningful name. I would like them to know that this is a dev cluster and not cluster 18. I can review the outputs that are now being exposed. Maybe I have some sensitivity there that I want to, make sure that something sensitive is not leaking and not exposed to the outside world. We talked about spaces and what they are. So in this case, I can decide that I want to expose this environment to whatever spaces. I can decide to all spaces in the organization. By default, it is published only in the scope of the current space you're in, just to avoid unwanted exposure. And basically, once you do that, then the environment has basically been published. It has been labeled as published. And at this point, it can be consumed. As mentioned, I have 2 clusters that I already exposed. So I'll go and show you how to basically consume them. In order to do that in the best way, I'll switch to a space called Designer. I'll go into the catalog there and you see something totally different. This is to simulate our R&D team, our desire to now launch an application. And I basically want to launch this Apache application. So I'll click Launch. I know I need it just for, a few testing. So I think I should be good with this duration. And in the inputs, I have something called target EKS. Someone, the designer of this Apache application, exposed to me this field. And I can see I have a staging EKS with these details, and I have a dev EKS with these details. So I can choose basically the infrastructure I would like to work with. Now, what happens behind the scenes once I click Launch is all the details of that cluster are being passed in terms of outputs to be consumed by the orchestration of this environment. And to show you what I mean, I'll go to the blueprint definition of the Apache application that we're now deploying and show you that in terms of environment references, we have the target EKS. If you remember the input that was called target EKS, then we see it here. There's also a way through labeling to filter the environments that you would like to show as inputs to this environment that we are now launching. And just to complete the picture, then you can see that the environment references, the target EKS input that we see on the top is referenced, and we take actually the EKS cluster name, and this is basically the Helm chart, the Apache Helm chart that can be deployed on the cluster that we provided. Totally different team, totally different space, but the environment and the infrastructure was basically shared between teams. The references are stored. So if needed, we have the graph of all connections in order to avoid all kinds of unwanted terminations from both directions. And basically, this data is critical when we want to expose such infrastructure. Just to complete the picture and show you how it would look like. So I have an environment already launched called My Application with all the logs that are now there, the Helm chart logs that are here, and with the quick access to this Apache application, something very naive that just illustrates that now it's up and running, which is awesome and great. And I basically am working on a Kubernetes cluster without really needing to deploy one, which is great. So with this, I think I'm going to move back to the slides and continue shortly about what next. So just as a quick recap, we saw how infrastructure can be shared between groups, between teams in the organization by using the publishing of environments, sharing of infrastructure. We're really enthusiastic about Torque in general, about all the latest and greatest that we're releasing. feel free to experiment with this, and we'll be happy to hear from you and your thoughts and feedback. And with that, moving on, if there are any questions,
Yep.
I'll be happy to answer.
Yep, and thank you again, Eden. That was a great demo for us. Really appreciate it. We have a couple questions I'm going to work through. If anybody has any others, please feel free to submit them. We have a few minutes to get to additional questions as we wrap up here. So one of the first questions that came in was about when shared infrastructure is torn down. What happens when shared infrastructure is torn down?
Okay, so actually, yeah, I briefly touched that, and that's an excellent question. So if now, in our example that we just went through, then if I would terminate the Kubernetes cluster and there are references, obviously we'll notify, and you'll need to bypass the warning in order to truly tear down the environment, because we understand that there are implications. So, the infrastructure team or those that now share the environment need to take a decision. And now that they have visibility about users that are consuming their infrastructure, they have that way of understanding if who is using what in order to decide whether to tear down the infrastructure or not.
Great. One of the other questions we got was about sharing sensitive infrastructure with other teams. I believe they mean sharing infrastructure with other teams in their organization.
Sure. So, okay. So as mentioned, if I understand the question, then we're treating the environment that is shared as a black box. The designers of the environment actually decide what they would like to expose as outputs to be consumed by others in the organization. So if now they are now providing an encrypted database, obviously that's something that stays inside of the environment as a black box, and now they can just expose the database for consumption by others in the organization. So it's up to the designers to really decide what stays inside and what is exposed for consumption by others in the organization.
We just have one other question here. As a reminder, if anyone wants to submit any others, we still have a few more minutes. But the last question that we have here is around the IAC supporting an environment. Do I need to change anything with my IAC in order to start sharing resources?
Okay, cool. So, yeah, that's an excellent question. So really in Torque in general, the concept is that we curate your ISC assets, and you really don't need to do anything in order to get started in Torque. Reusability and composability of your ISC assets is key in terms of concepts that we are preaching for in Torque, allowing you to basically, through a building block approach, to basically decide how to construct in the best way for your team, for your organization, in a standard way, how to basically create the building blocks and then the catalog of blueprints. And in the context of environment publishing, then really the publishing doesn't relate to the core IAC. We saw in the YAML of the blueprint that basically thin YAML that constructs the different IAC assets in terms of flow, orchestration flow, in terms of marshaling of the data, the definition of the environment itself, and the passing of information into the IAC asset. Therefore, the IAC asset remains clear and clean without basically any changes that are required to it.
Okay, thank you, Eden. That's all we have for today. Thank you, Eden. I know you're a very busy guy, so thank you again for taking the time to present today. Thank you to Corey on the back end for making sure that these events always go off without a hitch every month. And of course, thank you to our audience for spending the time with us today. The recording will be sent to you out over email in the next couple of days, so you should be able to access this. And as a reminder, visit Quali.com to learn more. There you can visit the Torque Playground, which is a public-facing version of our Torque platform, and you can launch real environments and start to get that firsthand experience with the product. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.